A bemutató az magyarul volt, but the talk will be in English. And it's the, what is it, 4-hour, 4:15, so you had a really, really long day. I also had a really, really long day. And I remember in the very, very first sentence in this room, when they introduced the whole slot of speakers, they mentioned agility, transformation, change, and disruption in the very first sentence. And before I get to that and why I believe that it's a bit too dramatic, I wanted to start with explaining the title, You Know Nothing, Jon Snow. It is a quip uttered by a female actress by the name of Ygritte in the, let's say, media phenomenon Game of Thrones. And it doesn't mean that this northern lordling, Jon Snow, doesn't know anything, doesn't know a bit of everything. It actually means that there is an initial naivete about him. It means that he's looking at the surface. It's a little bit of a superfluous type of an understanding of the world. And he needs to go deeper. He needs to look in the long distance. So let's see whether I will be able to make this talk fit the title. And the other thing which I wanted to talk about is actually a relatively recent story. There is a Hungarian gentleman by the name of, let's call him Mr. T, or Dr. T. He studied here in Budapest, the University of Technology, and he was the best in class. He was really considered a genius. He was the best in a class which is right now boasting the best CEOs of the Hungarian IT and telecom companies. He moved to the US. He earned a Ph.D. in electrical engineering from Stanford University. He lives in the Silicon Valley, and he worked for the two best companies of the time. He started with Intel, and now he works for Google, companies which hire the geniuses of the world. And about a few weeks ago, he got a call from SpaceX, which is the other company of Elon Todd. In addition to what people know, Tesla, there is SpaceX. And what basically SpaceX told him that as the captain of the universe, we would like you to join us and change not only the world, but go beyond it. This planet of ours will be uninhabitable in 200 years, 150 years. So let's go and conquer the world and the universe. Let's colonize Mars. Let's take the whole mankind and transport it to another planet. And SpaceX promises nothing less. So he said, okay, that's great. I'm being courted by SpaceX. It's really good for my ego. Let me go through the interviewing process. And what followed was about 2 or 3 weeks of IQ test. And then it was that on your CV it is mentioned that you can program in this IT language. So let us send you a very technical questionnaire. Then after that, let's simulate that you do actually a programming. He said that, okay, this may be a little beneath me, but I'm going to do it because I'm up for the challenge. So after about 2 weeks or 3 weeks in the interview process, he lost interest in the company because it was starting to check whether he's professional, whether he's really a good craftsman, or what he claims to be. I want to start with this photo because a photo speaks 1,000 words. So I say whether it's a college admissions, or mass recruiting, or executive search, or an assessment of an internal candidate or an internal talent, I think it's basically the same thing. When I explain it to, let's say, a child, you take a piece of Lego out of the box, and then you add it to your construction. That's it, nothing less, nothing more. And then I ask, okay, so when you were part of the admission committee at Harvard University, how did it feel? Give us some stories. Okay, when you did case interviews for McKinsey, okay, you must be really, really good at interviewing. How was your success rate? Executive search. So you worked at the top level, you worked for a prestigious company. What are the tricks of the trade? And so on and so on. I basically tell them, I am viewing all of this like this photo. On the moment when I interviewed, made the selection, or made the recommendation for the selection, this is how I felt. I am looking at this plant, and I cannot decide whether this plant is about to die, about to perish, or is about to start to bloom and flourish. Is that dry leaf on the left is the beginning of decay? Or is it something which is drying out and I have to pay attention to the healthy leaves on the other side? At Harvard University, one of the professors who was delegated by the staff was a professor by the name of Jorge Dominguez. He was a stellar professor in political science. Until about 3 years ago, when it became known that he assaulted some female colleagues, and the Me Too movement swept him away. Even the professorship, which was named after him, was completely abolished. He was sitting next to me. I did not know that. I could have mispredicted it. Then we also brought in somebody at the age of 14 into Harvard, into a Ph.D. program. Because he was stellar. He had the highest IQ, the best recommendations. He went through the interviewing process amazingly. 2 years later, he paraphrased an entire section of a PhD dissertation from like 10 years before. What we called, he kidnapped the brainchild. He was kicked out. McKinsey, top, management consulting company. Twice, the managing partner, the global managing partner, was re-elected by these, stellar partners and directors of the firm. He was found guilty on internal trading because later on he joined a well-known New York company and he basically used internal knowledge to his benefit. Search, executive search. At Egon Zehnder, again, the company which you go through 20 interviews to actually join. And out of the 20 interviews, one interviewer says, black ball, we don't want this person here, then you're out. So again, a very, very stellar interviewing process. There have been so many misfires. So we do not know at this stage whether this flower or this plant is going to flourish or perish. Is it something which is going to bring flora to this sand, or I don't know whether it is a desert, or is it actually something which is the last Mohican of this one before all life disappears? And as I mentioned, I have heard disruption and change and all of these things making it more and more dramatic. And they always started with technology. And I usually say that technology is both on the dependent variable and on the independent variable in this equation of change. And if you know statistics, you never select on the dependent variable because your argument becomes tautological. For those less socially, scientifically inclined, it's basically a potato is a potato is a potato is a potato. But I agree there are at least 4 paradigm shifts. The first is customer. And even if you are working in an enabling function in the back office, in the mid office, you do have your customers. Those are the internal customers. And customers are smarter than ever. There are no sectors and segments where it's not demand-driven. The economy is actually circular. People make very, very informed choices. And for them, it's no longer the matter. It's no longer the food they are consuming or the product they are using. It's the meaning. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit. So that's the first paradigm shift. The second paradigm shift is work, or workplace, or work enjoyment. It's no longer about earning a living, but living a purpose, joining an ecosystem, changing the world, changing the universe, as I have mentioned before. The third one, we are talking about it, is recruiting. It's candidate selection, talent acquisition, however you call it. And I'm going to actually argue that a lot of the recruiting techniques, looking at the CV, having some kind of a competency model, checking behaviors in the past, and from that trying to project into the future, are flawed. Because past successes do not equal past performance, and they do not equal future predictability. They basically mean in the past, at that level of complexity, that person, because of cognitively or emotionally, was able to achieve some success. And then the fourth, which is, I would call a paradigm shift, or a big tectonic shift itself, is actually the combination of all of those 3 above, and you hear culture, or purpose, or ecosystem, or complexity. And I'm going to use the word complexity. If you read a job description 10, 20 years ago, it had a company's name, a long list of tasks and to-dos, responsibilities. After that, maybe some qualifications. 10 years ago, it was more like competencies. Nowadays, if you read in every job description anywhere, a long paragraph about the company, and very few about what the job is about. And some of these descriptions of the company are actually very funny. Leave it to the Germans to be very subtle and nice about how they approach their company. There's actually a Berlin-based consulting company which puts out, "You are the hammer, we will find you the nail." And that's how it starts. There is a company in the United States which is a cleaning company. And if you read their advertisements on LinkedIn or anywhere else, they basically say, "To be or need to be." And NITO is the company's name. Again, very cheesy, very catchy types of phrases, but they speak to the purpose and the complexity which I'm going to talk about. Let me give you the example of coffee when I speak about transformation economy. The disruptions you are seeing today is actually not the first disruption. For some sectors, it's the 7th. For other sectors, it's the 8th. Coffee. Around 1850, coffee became a commodity to be consumed around the world. Initially, it was quality. You did not want to drink coffee which was bad. You selected coffee because it looked good, and you drank it. And usually it was in a big bean sack, and you picked out the coffee. Around the 1890s, that wasn't enough. Quality was not enough. Having a mastery of the product wasn't enough. You had to move to service. And what does that mean? Service actually means that you had to pursue satisfaction. So the quality in the consumer's eye. And often it wasn't the product itself, but the packaging. So it was no longer, and I'm switching from coffee, it wasn't no longer that the apple had to taste best, but it had to also look good. And as soon as the apple starts to look good, without flaws, without any worms in it, you know that it's not as good as the apples with worms in it. Around 1920, you moved to the next level, which was, I would call, differentiation. And you had to actually, in this differentiating environment, win by best practice. What do I mean by differentiation? An Englishman would not buy a coffee from a French colony because of national pride. On the front, the military did not want some kind of a soft coffee or anything which was actually the quickest and dirtiest to keep them awake at night in the trenches. Not a coffee example, but the Red Cross is not a cross in the Middle East. It becomes a Red Crescent. So there are all of these circumstances which go beyond what the customer wants and quality. Also, I'll give you another example of best practice. 1926, everybody knows about Ford and Model T. There is a gentleman by the name of Alfred Sloan who was the GM of General Motors. And he said that we are going to build a car for every purse and every purpose. So segmentation began. New experience, and let's go back to coffee. If you're talking about coffee itself, it's already, I'm using the word coffee, which is used less and less, because people use cappuccino and ristretto and latte, and all of these really, really words, which are no longer about the coffee itself, but about something specific, something which goes beyond the matter and goes to the meaning. So it's now the experience. You really want to have something which is not just the product, a good quality product which you like, segment it to your culture or your other specificities, but you also want the experience. Coca-Cola began Santa Claus. And that's about a 110-year-old marketing drive. Dove talked about female bodies. Not on the Photoshop, but female bodies as they are, reality. Illy, going back to coffee, was giving you a coffee which preserved its freshness because it was pressed in a certain way. So there was some kind of an experience, some kind of a joy, which had to go with all of the above. Then came lifestyle. It wasn't coffee anymore, it was coffee time. And if you talk to the young generations and you mention to them Folgers, or Nabisco, or Julius Mein, or Omnia, some of them might have read it in history books. But you tell them Nespresso, and they immediately make the connection. Part of it is George Clooney, part of it is because Nespresso actually tells you, you can be the best barista. You can take coffee time anytime, even at home. You can take basically that moment of sacredness, of thinking, of relaxing and so on, at the push of a button, just putting in a capsule. Well-being. Well-being goes beyond just experience and enjoyment and quality and all of that above, but actually it has to add to the well-being of a human being. I didn't put anything there, and that's deliberate, because despite what everybody tells you, coffee is not good for you. Coffee is not healthy, not because of the caffeine, but because of the acidity. But there are many, many food types where you are no longer purchasing food, but you are purchasing healthy food. And if you go back to quality, and if you look at some kind of a slush, including, I don't know, chia seeds and fava beans, they do not really look that good. And they do not taste that well. And they are no longer adhering to some kind of a satisfaction. They are no longer that much of a differentiation, but it's good for you. It's well-being. So in grocery stores around the world, all those healthy things will be in front of your eyes, and the non-unhealthy things were relegated to the bottom. And finally, there is societal progress, again for coffee. What does that mean? Companies like really Costa, but really Starbucks come to mind, are no longer selling coffee, but they are selling the idea of a fair trade coffee. A coffee which is actually going beyond companies, sectors, and even countries. And in this entire ecosystem, coffee is going to be the first product which is going to be sustainable. From growers, to transporters, to perkers, to packagers, to distributors, to stores, and so on and so on. There are more than 600 players in this ecosystem. There have been 7 waves of disruptions in this industry. For, let's say, the motor and engine industry, there is an 8th. At every disruptions of these, a lot of companies went out of bankruptcy, but that doesn't mean that it made all the others which came before relegated to the past. They are basically existing side by side. Very, very busy slide. I just want to go through on the left-hand side. So there are all of these ecosystems or models of complexity. People who thrive in these models of complexity at each level add value at different levels. And you can actually look at it in terms of complexity. For quality, these are your professionals. These are your craftsmen. So you want a gardener to tend to your garden. That's your craftsman. He gets a design, he gets mastery, he knows how to prune the trees. He does that. For service, well, you actually need to ask the customer what it is about. Somebody who provides quality would need to think about that, okay, I need to prune the garden of this gentleman, and then after that I have to go to that company, and so on and so on. So he begins to talk about customer service. He is aiming to get a solution. Best practice. Best practice is when you are managing the existing context. Segmentations, all kinds of independent variables. It's basically managing multiple perspectives. It is your practice leader. Differentiation. Differentiation, you move from connecting the existing dots to actually finding new connections between these dots. Reputation. We talked about the Nespressos, but it is also companies like, so many. Coca-Cola and Coca-Cola's missions, Dove, companies which are basically saying that we have a reputation to live up to because we are now leading the industry in carbon neutrality, we are leading the industry in this and that, and so on. Societal contribution. Those are basically people who focus more on just the sector or on the industry. Societal contribution is, I heard a couple of talks already which basically said that we would like to completely change how recruiting is done. Or we would like to actually put the recruiters and the talent in the same room, but they don't even know that they are in the same room because it's a virtual room. Societal progress, it's not only international organizations, but Do No Evil from Google. As I already mentioned, societal progress would be fair trade for coffee. It's basically shaping the ecosystem at the society level. And this is the mega theory which I wanted to mention. And I'm running out of time, but I think the previous talk finished 5 minutes earlier, so I'll take those 5 minutes any day. We've talked about the left-hand side, and that's the person. The mental model, when you are basically having a conversation, you are doing the interview, you are trying to get to that mental model. Is this person only observing? Is it somebody who fulfills the task? Okay, this is what I have to do, that's what I'm going to do. Is that person is already interpreting inputs, let's say from a customer side, integrating multiple perspectives, multiple teams, cross-sections, geographies, and so on. Begins to conceptualize. Why are we in this business? Can we do it in a different way? Abstract conceptualization. And here I believe that technology comes into place, because abstract conceptualization would be, what if instead of using buttons, we will use our fingers? And there is the iPhone story. What if you are no longer in a big chain of hotels, but in an even bigger chain of houses and apartments? There is the Airbnb story. Abstract conceptual interpretation. Tell it to an average person what exactly a carbon footprint is. But everybody has a very, very strong and positive feeling about making it less and fewer in terms of his activities. Abstract conceptual integration. Bring it all together and change the world. Those are the people we are talking about. Professional, service provider, practice leader, differentiator, creator, and so on. Time span. Time span is how long that person is good for the company, if I have to be very, very blunt. How long is the span of the value added of that person? Let's look in the middle, and I'll just give you one statistics. In the Benelux states, last year, 2 years ago, they looked at 140,000 companies, and they began to put the ambition of these companies. Out of the 140,000, more than 100,000 had their ambition of providing a quality product or service. Only 10 of those companies had the ambition which was around societal progress. 5 years before, there were even more companies, and 400,000 companies were in the quality. In 5 years, 75% of the qualities either moved up, or were gobbled up, or went out of business. Let's look at the right-hand side. So we said that we are going to put together the candidate, the ambition, but also look at the company. What is the company in for in terms of the ecosystem? Is it a company which really would like to just deliver something, a task management, or is it a company which wants to change the world, societal progress? In the organizational design, well, this is where you are really hiring. Even if you are hiring a business analyst or somebody, let's say, more of a handyman, you would like to hire somebody who is no longer delivering and executing, but enhancing and improving. Look at the role descriptions which you put together. There is always somewhere you need to apply, you need to enhance, you need to do it better, develop, make progress. That's why I said, that's your unit. And if somebody is being hired who doesn't live up to that, well, the salary has to reflect that. And from then on, above, it's actually exponential growth. It's even more. But people who are at this level, the Elon Musks of this world and the other people who will come up after him, well, they are no longer in it for money. And finally, what is the objective? And I'm already running over time, and there are 2 more slides, so I'm going to really, really quickly talk about it. This model, which is about ecosystems, which is about the various types of realities of complexity, actually is how you build your organization nowadays. It is no longer about reporting lines, it is no longer about spans of control, It is no longer about titles, at least in companies which are going to thrive in this post-seventh disruption era. It is exactly the level of complexity and the scope of the ambition of the company. Nowadays, teams are making up the craftsman. There is no longer an individual, and that's where we can talk a little bit about agility and sprints and so on. That's a proxy for that, because you would like to have the individuals moved up one level, but yet the execution still needs to be done. And there is one more thing which I want to show you, and that is exactly why I'm talking in the recruitment rocks, that the best way to hire somebody, even in an entry-level job, nowadays is no longer a competence assessment, or no longer a talk about some kind of a potential. Because if you look at a lot of the potential predictions, it's drive, learning agility, ambition, determination, and so on. I'm going to actually claim, maybe there's a talk somewhere else, when I can talk longer about, that it is actually mental processing capability. A person's understanding aptitude and a person's wish of living a certain level of purpose in a certain ecosystem. At the age of 20 or 25, he starts somewhere, and there is a projectile, and we can actually predict that projectile. And if you say that we need a captain of an industry or a creator, and that hire is no longer able to reach that level at a certain stage, then you are going to say, no, Napoleon, stop, you had it wrong. Not every soldier has a marshal's baton in his pocket. I ran over time. Thank you so much.